Tonight, we explore the profound depths of Jewish philosophy, a tradition that has guided seekers of wisdom for over 2 millennia. Now, dim the lights, perhaps light a candle, and let's ease into tonight's philosophical journey together. In the bustling intellectual marketplace of ancient Alexandria, around the 1st century of the Common Era, a remarkable figure named Philo watched as 2 great civilizations met and intermingled like rivers converging. Here, Jewish thought flowing from the scrolls of Torah and prophets encountered the rich waters of Greek philosophy, the rational investigations of Plato, the systematic thinking of Aristotle, and the practical wisdom of the Stoics. Philo, known as Philo the Jew, found himself living at the intersection of these profound traditions, and in that very intersection, something extraordinary began to emerge, the birth of Jewish philosophy itself. This was no mere intellectual exercise, but rather a profound existential necessity. The Jewish people, scattered and displaced from their homeland, found themselves in a new kind of exile, not just geographical, but intellectual and spiritual. How could one remain authentically Jewish while engaging with the profound questions raised by Greek philosophy? How could reason and revelation speak to each other without one drowning out the other? Philo, and those who would follow in his footsteps, discovered that wisdom often emerges not from the center of any single tradition, but from the fertile boundaries where cultures meet and dance together. The Hellenistic period, spanning roughly from the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE to the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, had already established Alexandria as perhaps the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. The great library of Alexandria attracted thinkers from across the Mediterranean, Stoics pursuing inner tranquility through virtue, Epicureans seeking pleasure through the absence of pain, and skeptics questioning the very foundations of knowledge. Into this cauldron of ideas stepped Jewish philosophers who dared to ask, what if our sacred texts could speak the language of reason? What if the eternal truths of our tradition could find expression through the tools of Greek logic and metaphysics? Philo's genius lay not in choosing between Greek philosophy and Jewish revelation, but in discovering their hidden harmony. He saw in the Hebrew Bible not merely religious stories, but allegories that contained the same insights that Plato and the Greeks had struggled to articulate. The divine logos, the divine reason that orders the cosmos, became for Philo the bridge between the particular revelation of the Jews and the universal search for truth that characterized Greek thought. This was intellectual hybridity not as confusion, but as creative synthesis, a new form of wisdom that could speak to both heart and mind. This ancient insight speaks directly to us today as we navigate our own complex landscape of identities, beliefs, and sources of meaning. In our interconnected world, we too live at the edges of cultures, languages, and worldviews. The wisdom of Philo reminds us that intellectual hybridity is not something to fear, but something to embrace. For it is at these cultural boundaries that profound understanding often emerges. And so our journey into Jewish philosophy begins not with answers, but with the courage to ask questions that bridge the familiar and the foreign, the sacred and the secular, the ancient and the eternal. What if reason and revelation were never meant to be rivals? Jewish philosophy challenges everything we believe about how truth is discovered. Here, we explore the tension early thinkers felt as they balanced biblical tradition with Greek rationalism. This same tension appears today in the debate between science and spirituality. Viewers can use this to cultivate a worldview that welcomes both empirical and moral truths. Picture, if you will, the great city of Alexandria in the 1st century of our Common Era. Here, in this intellectual melting pot where the wisdom of Egypt met the philosophy of Greece, there lived a remarkable Jewish thinker named Philo. He walked the streets where scholars debated the nature of reality in the same courtyards where rabbis studied the Torah, and Philo wondered, could these two great traditions of wisdom be harmonized rather than pitted against each other? Philo of Alexandria, living between 20 BCE and 50 CE, became the first great synthesizer of what would become known as Jewish philosophy. He understood that truth was like a multifaceted diamond. Each tradition illuminated different aspects of the same divine reality. While the Greeks had developed extraordinary systems of logic and metaphysics through pure rational inquiry, the Jewish tradition possessed something equally profound: direct revelation from the divine, preserved through sacred texts and lived experience. Rather than viewing these as competing methods, Philo saw them as complementary pathways to understanding. The Greeks had developed tools of reason that could illuminate the deeper meanings within biblical texts, while revelation provided the foundational truths that reason alone might never discover. This wasn't intellectual compromise, it was intellectual expansion, a recognition that human understanding grows when multiple sources of wisdom are brought into dialogue. To bridge these two worlds, Philo introduced a revolutionary concept: the divine logos. This wasn't just a philosophical term, but a profound theological insight that would echo through centuries of Jewish thought. The logos, in Philo's understanding, was like a divine bridge connecting the infinite, unknowable God with the finite world of matter and change. Through this logos, the same divine wisdom that inspired the biblical prophets could be understood through the categories of Greek philosophy. When Abraham exercised faith, this was rational choice guided by divine wisdom. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, this embodied the philosophical ideal of the philosopher king. Philo showed how the ancient stories weren't merely historical records, but philosophical teachings disguised as narratives, waiting to be interpreted through both revelation and reason. This hermeneutical approach, reading scripture through philosophical categories while maintaining its divine authority, became a template for all future Jewish philosophy. And so, as we sit here in the quiet of our own time, we recognize that Philo's synthesis speaks directly to contemporary struggles. Today, we often hear science presented as incompatible with spirituality, empirical facts pitted against moral truths, reason dismissed as soulless, and faith dismissed as irrational. But the ancient Jewish philosophical tradition suggests a different path, one where wonder before the mysteries of creation fuels both scientific inquiry and spiritual devotion. The same divine logos that Philo saw as operative in biblical revelation can be recognized in the elegant mathematical relationships that govern quantum physics, in the self-organizing principles of evolution, in the consciousness that emerges from complex neural networks. We need not choose between the empirical and the ethical, between what our instruments can measure and what our hearts can reverence. The wisdom tradition that began with Philo offers us a third way: the patient, contemplative pursuit of truth wherever it may lead, knowing that all truth ultimately springs from the same divine source. In this synthesis, we find not the end of mystery, but the deepening of it. In 10th century Babylonia, the Geonim encountered rediscovered Greek texts that transformed Jewish thought. Picture, if you will, the great academies of Sura and Pumbedita, ancient centers of Jewish learning where scholars had devoted centuries to understanding the Torah and Talmud. These were places of deep reverence, where the words of Scripture were examined with meticulous care, generation after generation. And then, almost unexpectedly, scrolls containing the works of Aristotle, Plato, and other Greek philosophers began to circulate through the Islamic world, translated into Arabic, making their way into the hands of these devoted Jewish scholars. It was as if a window had been opened in a room they thought they knew completely, revealing an entirely new landscape of thought beyond. This historical scene reveals a profound insight that intellectual traditions evolve through unexpected encounters. The Geonim, these heads of the Babylonian academies, did not simply reject these foreign ideas as many might have done. Instead, they recognized something remarkable. They saw in Greek philosophy a systematic approach to questions they themselves had been asking for centuries. Questions about the nature of God, the purpose of existence, the foundations of ethics. The rationalist philosophy that entered biblical Talmudic Judaism during this period was not an invasion, but rather a conversation across centuries and cultures. These scholars began the delicate work of harmonizing Greek logical methods with their sacred traditions, finding that reason and revelation could walk hand in hand rather than stand in opposition. Consider how this ancient encounter mirrors our own modern experience. Today, the Internet exposes us to global ideas with a speed and breadth the Geonim could never have imagined, where they received translated scrolls carried along trade routes over months or years. We receive new perspectives instantaneously from every corner of the world. A philosophical concept from East Asia, an ethical framework from Africa, a spiritual practice from South America, all these arrive at our doorstep with a single click. And like those medieval scholars, we face a choice. Do we close ourselves off, fearing that these unfamiliar ideas might threaten what we hold dear? Or do we approach them as the Geonim did, with curious minds and discerning hearts, asking what truth might be revealed through this unexpected encounter? The wisdom of those ancient academies suggests that growth often comes not from isolation, but from thoughtful engagement with the unfamiliar. During the Geonic period, philosophy found itself in creative tension with Kabbalah, the mystical tradition of Judaism. This was not a battle to be won, but a dialogue to be sustained. Rationalism offered clarity, logical structure, and universal principles that could be debated and demonstrated. Mysticism offered depth, ineffable experience, and truths that resided beyond the reach of words alone. Both schools would eventually become part of classic rabbinic literature, woven together into the rich tapestry of Jewish thought. This teaches us something essential about how wisdom traditions survive and flourish. They do not remain static. They absorb, they question, they synthesize. They allow themselves to be transformed while remaining rooted in their deepest values. And so, as we rest in this understanding, let us carry with us the gentle lesson of those Babylonian academies. New perspectives need not be threats to be feared, but can instead become catalysts for growth, doorways into deeper understanding. When we encounter an idea that challenges our assumptions, we might remember those scholars receiving Greek texts by candlelight, their ancient traditions suddenly illuminated from an unexpected angle. In that moment of encounter, they did not lose themselves. They became more fully themselves, more capable of articulating what they believed and why. Perhaps we too can approach the unfamiliar with such gracious curiosity, trusting that truth, wherever it is found, ultimately serves the same divine source. Let that thought settle gently, like evening light falling across an open page, as we continue our journey through the seeds of Jewish rationalism. When Ben Sira wrote his wisdom text, he faced a Jewish world under foreign influence, revealing how ethics can anchor identity. Picture, if you will, a learned scribe in Jerusalem around 180 BCE, watching as Hellenistic culture flows through the streets like a powerful river reshaping the landscape. Ben Sira, Yeshua ben Eleazar ben Sira, was witnessing what we might call the first great clash between ancient wisdom and modern cosmopolitan influence. His grandfather would later translate this work into Greek, But Ben Sira himself wrote in Hebrew, deliberately choosing the language of his ancestors in an age when many were abandoning it. The Book of Sirach, as we know it today, represents not merely wisdom literature, but a profound philosophical response to cultural upheaval. His narrative shows that wisdom flourishes when communities face cultural pressure. Consider what Ben Sira was experiencing: the Seleucid Empire spreading Greek language, philosophy, and customs across the ancient world. Jewish communities were wrestling with questions that echo through time: how to maintain identity while engaging with dominant culture. Ben Sira's genius lay not in retreat or rejection, but in a deeper philosophical insight. He understood that true wisdom doesn't fear cultural contact, it transforms it. His text becomes a manual for ethical navigation, teaching that when external forms shift, internal values must become stronger, clearer, more intentional. The ancient scribe saw what we now understand, that ethics functions as an identity anchor, a compass that keeps us oriented when cultural winds blow strongly from unfamiliar directions. This wasn't merely about preserving tradition, it was about the evolution of moral imagination. Today's cultural flux mirrors this ancient struggle for grounded values with remarkable precision. We live in an age of unprecedented cultural exchange, digital connectivity, and rapid social transformation. Like Ben Sira's contemporaries, we face the challenge of maintaining authentic identity while engaging with diverse influences. The ethical imagination he pioneered offers us a profound template. Rather than erecting walls or dissolving into relativism, we can cultivate what Ben Sira called wisdom, a living, breathing capacity to discern, choose, and act in ways that honor both our deepest values and our evolving understanding of the good. His insights predict our contemporary struggles with authenticity in social media culture, the tension between tradition and progress, and the need for moral grounding in an age of information overload. The ethical imagination becomes not a rigid code, but a dynamic capacity for wisdom. You can apply this ancient wisdom to your own life by developing what Ben Sira would recognize as ethical reflection, a practice of regularly examining your choices through the lens of your deepest values. In chaotic times, when external pressures pull you in multiple directions, return to this inner sanctuary of reflection. Ask yourself, what principles do I want to anchor my decisions in? How can I engage with cultural influences while maintaining my authentic center? The rise of the ethical imagination that Ben Sira initiated teaches us that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about cultivating the capacity to ask better questions, to respond to cultural pressure with thoughtful rather than reactive choices. In this way, ethics becomes not restriction, but liberation, the freedom to remain authentically yourself while engaging fully with the world's beautiful, challenging complexity. What if inner experience could reveal truths beyond rational explanation? Early Jewish mystics challenged everything we assume about how knowledge is acquired. Their insights emerged during moments of political instability and longing for transcendence. Tonight, we journey into the mists of time to where ancient seekers discovered that the deepest truths cannot be grasped through logic alone. Imagine, if you will, a world where the boundaries between the material and spiritual were not yet drawn with the sharp lines we know today. In the centuries following the destruction of the Second Temple, as Jewish communities navigated exile and uncertainty, a revolutionary form of knowing began to emerge from the shadows of conventional learning. These were the Merkabah mystics of the 2nd to 6th centuries, named after the divine chariot described in Ezekiel's vision. Unlike their contemporaries, who found comfort in rigorous legal debate and textual interpretation, these seekers yearned for direct encounter with the divine presence. Their sacred literature, the Haishalot texts, describes perilous journeys through 7 heavenly palaces, each requiring purification of both body and soul. They understood that political turmoil, the very instability that surrounded them, was not separate from their spiritual seeking, but was in fact the very condition that made such profound transformation possible. Their radical insight was this: when external structures crumble, inner architecture becomes not just possible, but essential. The Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, an enigmatic text whose origins are debated to be dated between the 2nd century BCE and 6th century CE, reveals their revolutionary methodology. Rather than simply reading about divine creation, they sought to participate in it through meditation on Hebrew letters and numbers, understanding that creation itself was an ongoing process of divine speech. Their teachings suggest that reality operates on multiple layers simultaneously: surface and depth, literal and symbolic, rational and intuitive. This dual perception became their hallmark, maintaining reverence for reason while recognizing its limitations. They discovered that the deepest wisdom often emerges not from the mind's linear progression, but from the soul's ability to hold contradictory truths in peaceful coexistence. Today, we witness an extraordinary echo of this ancient wisdom in the global mindfulness movement. Modern seekers, like their ancient predecessors, are discovering that inner experience offers access to dimensions of understanding that remain hidden to purely analytical approaches. The parallels are striking. Corporate boardrooms now incorporate meditation practices, universities teach contemplative studies alongside philosophy, and therapists recognize intuition as a legitimate therapeutic tool. Yet, as we embrace these ancient insights in contemporary form, we would do well to remember their original context. The early mystics did not retreat from the world's chaos. Rather, they transformed their participation in it. Their inner work was not an escape, but a deepening of their ability to engage authentically with existence. In this spirit, consider creating quiet spaces in your daily life where intuition complements intellect, not as opposing forces, but as harmonious partners in the ongoing work of understanding. The ancient path of inner discovery awaits, not as an abandonment of reason, but as its gentle completion. In 1st century Alexandria, Philo described the Logos as the bridge between God and creation, revealing a new model of divine intimacy. This concept offered an answer to the urgent human question of how the infinite relates to the finite. Let us turn our attention to this remarkable moment in human thought, when the ancient question of the relationship between the boundless and the bounded found a profound new expression in the work of a brilliant Jewish philosopher living in the cosmopolitan intellectual center of the Roman Empire. Philo of Alexandria, living around 20 BCE to 50 CE, found himself in one of the most intellectually vibrant cities of the ancient world. Here, Greek philosophy, Egyptian mysticism, and Jewish tradition intersected in ways that were both challenging and generative. The philosophical problem that haunted him was ancient yet eternal. How can the infinite, ineffable divine nature relate to our finite, material world? Philo's genius lay in his insight that this relationship could be understood through the concept of the Logos, functioning as what he called a second God, an intermediary that bridges the gap between transcendence and immanence. In our contemporary world, we face this same fundamental question in different language. When we contemplate a universe governed by natural laws, when we experience the cold precision of scientific explanation, when we confront the apparent conflict between reason and spiritual meaning, Philo's Logos offers us a profound reframing. Instead of seeing rational explanation as opposed to divine encounter, Philo suggests that reason itself becomes the very pathway through which we can approach the infinite. The scientific law, the mathematical principle, the logical structure, these are not barriers to the sacred, but rather bridges to understanding how the divine manifests in creation. Consider how this transforms our daily experience. When you encounter the elegant precision of a mathematical principle governing celestial mechanics, when you trace the logical reasoning that reveals the interconnectedness of ecological systems, when you experience the moment of clarity that comes through patient philosophical reflection, you are, in Philo's understanding, participating in the Logos, the divine reason that both transcends and animates the world. This ancient insight suggests that awe and analysis need not be enemies, but partners in a grand symphony of understanding. And so we find that the bridge Philo described continues to carry us, 2 millennia later, from the finite realm of our immediate experience toward the infinite horizon of wisdom that calls to the deepest parts of our being. What if rational inquiry could strengthen rather than weaken faith? This question lies at the heart of one of the most profound insights in medieval Jewish thought. Picture, if you will, a medieval Jewish scholar in 12th century Egypt studying both the Talmud and the works of Aristotle. While others might see these as competing sources of truth, thinkers like Maimonides recognized something revolutionary. That philosophy could serve as a clarifier, a gentle lens that brings the divine truths of Scripture into sharper focus. This wasn't about replacing faith with reason, but about allowing reason to illuminate the deeper meanings already present in Revelation. In our modern age of scientific skepticism and spiritual seeking, this medieval insight offers a pathway through our contemporary struggle between doubt and belief. The medieval Jewish philosophers understood something that our current culture often forgets, that faith and reason are not adversaries, but dancing partners in the grand choreography of human understanding. Maimonides, in his Guide for the Perplexed, argued that when we approach Scripture with rational inquiry, we discover layers of meaning that might otherwise remain hidden. It's like examining a beautiful tapestry. You can appreciate its colors and patterns from a distance, but only by moving closer and studying each thread do you begin to understand the intricate design and skill of the weaver. These philosophers believed that God, being the source of all truth, could never be contradicted by genuine rational discovery. If something discovered through careful reasoning seemed to conflict with religious teaching, it meant we hadn't yet understood either the philosophical truth or the religious truth deeply enough. Consider how this applies to our daily struggles in the modern world. We live in an age where scientific discovery constantly challenges traditional beliefs, where social media amplifies every doubt and certainty in equal measure. The medieval Jewish approach offers us a different way to navigate this landscape. Instead of seeing every scientific discovery as a threat to meaning, or every spiritual insight as an abandonment of critical thinking, we can embrace what Maimonides called acquired knowledge of God, understanding that grows through both intellectual discipline and spiritual practice. This doesn't mean accepting contradiction or abandoning discernment. Rather, it means developing the patience to sit with questions, the humility to recognize that our current understanding is partial, and the wisdom to recognize that both rational inquiry and spiritual insight seek the same destination: truth. In practical terms, how might we apply this wisdom today? Begin by using critical thinking not to tear down your values, but to understand them more deeply. When you encounter something that challenges your beliefs, whether in science, philosophy, or personal experience, ask not, "Does this destroy what I hold dear?" but "What is this teaching me?" What aspect of truth is being revealed here? This approach transforms conflict into dialogue, doubt into deeper faith. The medieval Jewish philosophers showed us that the deepest understanding comes not from choosing between reason and revelation, but from allowing them to illuminate each other. In this way, our skepticism becomes a friend to our beliefs, helping them grow stronger, more nuanced, and more alive. And so we discover that the search for truth through reason, rather than diminishing the sacred, serves it, becoming itself a form of reverence, a way of honoring the divine spark of intellect that makes us beautifully, complexly human. When the patriarchs were interpreted as ethical archetypes, their lives revealed universal patterns of moral development. This interpretation reframed ancient stories as psychological guides. Today, we discover something remarkable about the wisdom embedded in this approach. The ancient rabbis and philosophers understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to appreciate. That character is not merely formed through rules and prohibitions, but through the cultivation of virtues that become the very architecture of the soul. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were not just historical figures to be remembered, but living examples of moral possibility to be emulated. Their stories became psychological laboratories where human consciousness could observe the development of faith, courage, compassion, and wisdom. And so we find ourselves standing at the threshold of a profound realization that ethics itself becomes a pathway to the divine, not through external compliance, but through internal transformation. Consider the magnificent interpretation offered by Philo of Alexandria, who lived in the 1st century of our common era. This Jewish philosopher, writing in Greek yet thinking in the deep traditions of Hebrew wisdom, saw in Abraham the archetype of faith guided by reason. Not faith as blind acceptance, but faith as the marriage of trust and intelligence. In Joseph, he recognized the model of the wise statesman, someone who could navigate complex political waters while maintaining moral integrity. And in Moses, he beheld the ideal leader who unified legislative wisdom, priestly compassion, and prophetic vision. These were not merely historical characters to be admired from a distance, but living patterns of human development to be consciously cultivated. The rabbis of the Talmudic period extended this insight further, teaching that every generation must see itself as if it stood at Mount Sinai, receiving the ethical teachings afresh. This temporal expansion of moral responsibility reveals that virtue is not inherited, but actively chosen and practiced in each moment of conscious living. This brings us to a remarkable insight that bridges ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. Today's interest in character education and virtue ethics echoes this very approach that Jewish philosophers developed 2 millennia ago. Modern educational theorists like Alasdair MacIntyre and positive psychologists like Martin Seligman have rediscovered what the rabbis knew, that moral development follows recognizable patterns that can be cultivated through intentional practice. Just as the patriarchs were seen as exemplars of different virtues, contemporary research shows that character strengths like wisdom, courage, justice, and compassion can be deliberately developed through what philosophers call habit formation. But here the Jewish approach offers something unique, the understanding that ethical development is not merely self-improvement, but a form of prayer, a way of drawing closer to the divine presence. When we cultivate patience, we participate in divine patience. When we develop compassion, we mirror divine compassion. When we practice justice, we become partners in the divine project of making the world more aligned with its intended goodness. And so, we return to the practical wisdom embedded in this ancient understanding. You can apply this insight by seeing moral growth as a lifelong spiritual practice. Each ethical choice becomes not just a decision between right and wrong, but an opportunity for character development, for becoming more fully the person you are called to be. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob remind us that moral development is neither automatic nor effortless. It requires conscious choice, patient persistence, and often the courage to act differently from those around us. In our contemporary world, this might manifest as choosing honesty when deception seems easier, practicing patience when frustration arises, or showing compassion when judgment would be simpler. Each such choice is not merely ethical behavior, but participation in the ongoing creation of a more sacred world. The path of ethics becomes the path to God, not because God demands our compliance, but because our highest potential as human beings is found in the cultivation of virtues that reflect the divine image within us. And in this understanding, we discover that every moment of moral choice is an invitation to sacred growth. Kabbalists envisioned the universe as layered emanations, revealing that reality is richer than appearances. This challenge to conventional wisdom about what counts as knowledge invites us to consider how our everyday perceptions might be missing profound dimensions of existence. Imagine, if you will, looking at a single candle flame. To the naked eye, it appears as a simple, dancing light. Yet the Kabbalist would tell us that this flame is but the visible tip of something far more complex, a nexus where different worlds intersect, where divine energy flows through channels we cannot normally perceive. In the 12th and 13th centuries, particularly in the region of Occitania in southern France, Jewish mystics began developing this radical understanding of cosmic structure, articulated most profoundly in texts like the Zohar and the Bahir. They spoke of reality not as a flat, three-dimensional space, but as an intricate system of divine emanations, layers upon layers of existence that interpenetrate and flow into one another, creating the illusion of separate objects while actually forming one unified whole. These mystical teachers introduced the concept of the Sephirot, 10 divine attributes that serve as channels through which the infinite divine essence, called Ein Sof, flows into finite existence. Picture a great tree whose roots extend infinitely downward into divine mystery, while its branches reach out to touch every aspect of the manifest world. The Sephirot are not separate from God, nor are they separate from creation. They are the divine energy itself, structuring reality from the most ethereal spiritual realms down to the material world we experience. Isaac Luria, the 16th century mystic often called the father of contemporary Kabbalah, further developed this vision by introducing the concept of tzimtzum, divine contraction, suggesting that before creation, God contracted or withdrew in certain aspects to make space for finite existence. This is not a withdrawal of love, but rather the necessary precondition for genuine relationship, for the possibility of genuine choice and growth. Like a mother who makes space for her child to grow independently, this divine contraction allows for the beautiful paradox of finite beings discovering infinite meaning within their limitations. What makes this mystical cosmology so remarkably prescient is how it resonates with contemporary discoveries in both physics and metaphysics. Modern quantum physics reveals a universe far stranger and more interconnected than classical mechanics ever imagined. Quantum entanglement suggests that particles can be mysteriously connected across vast distances, while string theory proposes additional dimensions beyond our ordinary perception. The Kabbalistic understanding of reality as layered emanations finds an unexpected echo in theories about the multiverse, parallel dimensions, and the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence. But perhaps more significantly, the Kabbalistic approach to knowledge itself offers something vital to our contemporary age. They distinguished between the knowledge of the mind and the knowledge of the heart, between theoretical understanding and lived mystical experience. This was not a rejection of rational inquiry, but rather an expansion of what we might consider legitimate ways of knowing. They challenged the conventional wisdom that only what can be measured and quantified truly exists, suggesting instead that reality includes dimensions accessible only through contemplative practice, ethical development, and the cultivation of refined spiritual sensitivity. For our modern lives, this Kabbalistic insight offers a profound invitation to remain open to unseen dimensions of experience. This does not mean abandoning critical thinking or scientific method, but rather complementing them with a recognition that there are aspects of reality that reveal themselves only through patient attention, ethical development, and contemplative practice. Consider how often our most meaningful experiences, the moment when we truly understand another person, the instant when we grasp a complex truth, the peace that comes from genuine forgiveness, transcend our ordinary categories of measurement. The Kabbalist would suggest that these moments give us glimpses into the deeper structure of reality, where all apparent separation dissolves into a unified whole. In a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected, this mystical vision reminds us that underneath the surface of apparent diversity lies a profound unity. Each person we encounter, each challenge we face, each moment of beauty we experience participates in this cosmic dance of divine emanation. And by cultivating the spiritual sensitivity to perceive these hidden connections, we align ourselves with the deepest purposes of existence itself, to recognize and participate in the ongoing revelation of divine wisdom in the world around us. What if discipline is the gateway to liberation? This profound question challenges our most fundamental assumptions about freedom itself. We often imagine freedom as the absence of constraints, the unbounded ability to choose whatever we desire in any moment. But Jewish legal philosophy, what we call halakha, presents a revolutionary counter-narrative. The great medieval philosopher Maimonides, writing in 12th century Egypt, observed that true freedom comes not from the absence of structure, but from the wisdom to choose the right structures. Think of it this way. A river flows most beautifully when contained within banks. Without boundaries, it becomes a swamp. Without discipline, choice becomes chaos. The wisdom of halakha extends far beyond religious observance. Jewish legal philosophy teaches us that law creates the possibility for meaningful choice by eliminating the need to constantly decide fundamental questions. When we establish ethical frameworks, daily rhythms, and intentional practices, we free ourselves from the exhausting burden of perpetual decision-making. The Sabbath, for example, isn't a restriction on freedom. It's a weekly liberation from the tyranny of productivity. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the 20th century mystic, wrote that the Sabbath is a palace in time where we can breathe freely, knowing that creation is complete and good. This isn't about divine command. It's about human flourishing through wise constraint. This understanding of law as liberation has profound implications for our contemporary lives. We live in an age of infinite choice, streaming services with thousands of options, social media feeds designed to capture our attention, consumer markets offering endless variations of every product. Paradoxically, this abundance often leaves us feeling less free, not more. The anxiety of choice, the paralysis of options, the exhaustion of perpetual decision-making, these are the symptoms of freedom without framework. Jewish legal philosophy offers a different path, the wisdom of conscious boundaries. When we deliberately choose our constraints, whether in our technology use, our daily schedules, or our ethical commitments, we create space for genuine flourishing. A musician doesn't feel constrained by the rules of musical composition. They find liberation within harmonic structure. Consider how this wisdom applies to your own life. Instead of resolutions that depend on willpower alone, create structures that support your best self. Establish morning rituals that don't require daily negotiation. Design your environment to make good choices easier and poor choices more difficult. Choose your commitments not as restrictions, but as foundations for deeper freedom. The medieval sage, Rabbi Bahia ibn Pakuda, wrote that the soul finds peace through orderly conduct, while chaos brings torment. This isn't about rigid rule-following. It's about the profound wisdom of knowing that freedom and structure are not opposites, but partners in the dance of human flourishing. And so we discover that the highest form of freedom is not the absence of law, but the wisdom to choose the laws that set us free. When Job faced undeserved suffering, his story revealed the universal truth of moral responsibility amid uncertainty. Here was a righteous man, blameless in the eyes of tradition, stripped of everything he held dear, his children, his wealth, his health, his standing in the world. And yet, the book of Job does not offer simple answers. It does not tell us why the innocent suffer. Instead, it holds us in a space of profound discomfort, a space where easy explanations dissolve, and we are left with something far more demanding, the question of how we should act when the universe itself seems indifferent to our moral categories. This ancient wisdom literature, composed perhaps in the 5th or 4th century before the Common Era, stands as one of humanity's most honest examinations of theodicy. That philosophical attempt to reconcile the existence of evil and suffering with the notion of a just and powerful creator. The term itself, theodicy, comes from the Greek words for God and justice, a vindication of the divine. But Job's story resists neat vindication. It challenges us to move beyond asking why suffering exists and toward asking how we might respond to it with integrity. Consider the structure of Job's ordeal. His friends arrive, those famous comforters, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and they offer the conventional wisdom of their time. Surely, they reason, Job must have sinned. Suffering in their framework is proportional to guilt. This is the doctrine of retribution, a belief that the universe operates according to strict moral accounting. But Job refuses this explanation. He maintains his innocence not out of arrogance, but out of honesty. He has searched his heart and found no cause for such devastation, and here is where the book becomes philosophically revolutionary. Rather than resolving the tension by revealing some hidden sin, the narrative allows Job's protest to stand. The universe, it suggests, is not a simple ledger of rewards and punishments. Righteousness does not guarantee prosperity, and suffering does not prove wickedness. This is a profound and unsettling truth, one that Jewish philosophy would return to again and again across the centuries. It asks us to consider whether we can be moral without the promise of reward, whether we can act justly even when justice seems absent from the world itself. This ancient wrestling with uncertainty finds remarkable expression in modern Jewish philosophy, particularly in the work of Emanuel Levinas. Born in Lithuania in 1906, Levinas survived the Holocaust as a prisoner of war, while his father and brothers were murdered by the SS. His philosophy emerged from this crucible of suffering, and it placed ethics at the very foundation of human existence. For Levinas, responsibility is not something we choose. It is something that claims us before we even have the chance to decide. The face of another person, vulnerable and exposed, calls to us with an infinite demand. We are responsible for the other, he taught, in a way that precedes any calculation of what we might receive in return. This is ethics without guarantee. Responsibility embraced not because we know the outcome will be good, but because the other stands before us in need, Levinas called this an ethics of the face, a recognition that in encountering another human being, we encounter something infinite, something that cannot be reduced to our concepts or our self-interest. The connection to Job becomes clear. Both insist that moral action cannot depend on understanding the full picture. We act rightly not because we comprehend the cosmic order, but because righteousness is its own imperative. And now, let that thought rest for a moment, as we consider how this ancient wisdom speaks to the dilemmas of our present age. Today, we face challenges that mirror Job's struggle with uncertainty. Climate change confronts us with suffering that seems distributed without regard to virtue or vice. The nations that have contributed least to carbon emissions often bear the heaviest burdens of drought, flood, and displacement. Economic inequality persists across generations, trapping children in circumstances they did nothing to create. How do we act responsibly when the systems that produce suffering are so vast and interconnected that our individual choices seem insignificant? When the outcomes of our actions are uncertain, perhaps unknowable, do we have grounds for ethical commitment? Jewish philosophy offers a profound response. Responsibility does not require certainty. The Talmudic principle captured in the phrase, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, vlo ata ben chorin lhibatel mimena. It is not upon you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it, speaks directly to this condition. We are called to act even when we cannot see the end, even when our contribution seems small against the scale of the problem. So what might this mean for you, tonight, listening in the quiet of your own space? It means that choosing responsibility, even when outcomes are uncertain, is not naive optimism. It is philosophical courage. When you reduce your consumption knowing that your individual impact on climate change is infinitesimal, you participate in something larger than calculation. When you speak out against injustice knowing that your voice alone will not change systems, you honor an ethical demand that precedes any guarantee of success. This is the wisdom Job ultimately receives, not an explanation of his suffering, but an encounter with something vast and mysterious that calls him beyond his need for answers. And this is what Levinas understood in the face of the other. That responsibility is not a contract with known terms, but an infinite calling that makes us fully human. As this segment draws to a close, carry with you this gentle truth. Moral responsibility does not require certainty about outcomes. It requires only the willingness to respond to what is before you, the suffering that calls for attention, the injustice that demands witness, the future that needs tending. In this, we find not answers to the problem of evil, but something perhaps more precious, a way to live with integrity amid the mystery. In ancient Israel, communal obligations shaped ethical life, revealing the insight that identity is relational. This challenges modern individualism. The Hebrew concept of kehilah, the sacred community, was never merely a collection of individuals gathering for convenience. Rather, it was understood as a living organism where each member's moral development was inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole. The Talmudic principle, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Baze, all of Israel are responsible for one another, was not simply a legal doctrine, but a profound understanding of human nature itself. When we examine the ancient Mishkan, the portable sanctuary, we see how every member of the community contributed. Some brought gold and silver, others offered skilled craftsmanship, still others prepared the sacred anointing oil. Each person's unique gifts became part of a larger tapestry of divine service, revealing that individual identity was not diminished, but fulfilled through communal participation. This relational understanding of identity stands in stark contrast to the modern Western emphasis on radical individualism, the belief that the authentic self is a solitary, self-sufficient entity. Jewish philosophical tradition offers a different lens, the self as fundamentally relational, constituted through our commitments, responsibilities, and connections to others. The medieval philosopher Moses Maimonides, in his Guide for the Perplexed, argues that human perfection cannot be achieved in isolation, but only through active participation in the moral community. Yet this is not merely about social conformity. The Hebrew concept of chesed, loving kindness, suggests that our deepest ethical obligations emerge not from abstract duty, but from our recognition that we are bound together in an intricate web of mutual dependence. When we act with compassion toward others, we are not simply being generous. We are acknowledging the fundamental truth of our interconnected nature, recognizing that harm to another diminishes ourselves and benefit to another elevates our own spiritual condition. Contemporary psychological research has begun to catch up with this ancient wisdom. Studies in social neuroscience reveal that our brains are literally shaped by our relationships, that mirror neurons fire not just when we observe others' actions, but when we empathize with their experiences. Research on social baseline theory suggests that humans have evolved to share cognitive and emotional burdens with others, that our psychological well-being depends fundamentally on our social connections. The work of psychologists like Martin Seligman on perma theory, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement places relationships as one of the 5 pillars of human flourishing. Yet there's something uniquely profound in the Jewish understanding, that community is not merely instrumental to individual well-being, but constitutive of what it means to be human. The Hebrew word kavod, honor, literally means weight or heaviness, suggesting that our dignity as human beings emerges through the weight of our responsibilities to others. We become substantial, meaningful persons through the density of our commitments to the common good. So how might we apply this ancient insight in our contemporary lives? The practice begins with a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "What can this community do for me?" we learn to ask, "What can I offer this community?" This is not about losing oneself in unhealthy codependency, but about discovering our authentic gifts through service to something larger than our individual interests. Modern Jewish communities have embodied this through tikkun olam, repairing the world, where individuals engage in social justice work not from guilt or obligation, but from the recognition that our own healing is bound up with the healing of the world. We might begin by examining our daily interactions, the colleague we consistently support, the neighbor we check on during difficult times, the friend who knows our struggles and loves us anyway. These relationships are not incidental to our moral development. They are the very medium through which we become the persons we are meant to be. The ancient rabbis understood that every individual soul contains a unique spark of divine light, and that this light shines most brilliantly when it illuminates the darkness for others. In nurturing relationships that support mutual growth, we participate in the ongoing creation of a more just and compassionate world, discovering that our deepest happiness emerges not from getting what we want, but from becoming who we are meant to be in relation to others. What if justice is a perpetual process rather than a final outcome? Jewish legal thought reframes our expectations of fairness. This insight resonates with today's evolving civil rights movements. Viewers can apply this by embracing justice as a daily practice. The Hebrew concept of tzedek, justice, emerges from a profound understanding that the pursuit of fairness cannot be static, cannot be completed, cannot be declared finished. In the Talmudic tradition, we find an extraordinary legal principle, kol hadin din v'chesov. Every judgment requires further judgment. The great sages understood that human understanding of justice evolves, deepens, becomes more nuanced with each generation. When Maimonides synthesized Jewish law in the 12th century, he drew upon Aristotle's ethics while grounding them in divine revelation, creating a framework where justice becomes not a destination, but an ongoing dialogue between human reason and eternal moral truth. This ancient wisdom finds profound resonance in contemporary civil rights movements. When we witness the protests in Ferguson, the Women's March, the climate justice movement, and the ongoing fight for voting rights, we see communities embracing justice not as a final victory to be celebrated, but as a living commitment requiring constant renewal. The Musa tradition, the Jewish ethical literature that emerged in medieval times, speaks of tzedek as something that must be practiced daily, hourly, moment by moment. The 19th century Musa movement within Orthodox communities understood that justice is cultivated through small acts of righteousness, building a character that becomes naturally inclined toward fairness. And so, we can transform this understanding into personal practice. Begin each day by asking, where can I choose fairness over convenience? Where can I extend justice where it might not be expected? Justice as daily practice means listening more deeply to those whose voices have been marginalized. It means recognizing that our understanding of fairness today might be incomplete, requiring humility and openness to growth. Like the ancient sages who understood that every legal precedent requires reconsideration, we too can approach each moral decision with both conviction and curiosity, knowing that our pursuit of justice is not about reaching a destination, but about walking a path of continuous ethical awakening. Let that thought settle gently as we rest in this understanding of justice as a living, breathing commitment to fairness that calls us forward, day after day, toward a more just world. When the Yetzer Hara tempted individuals in rabbinic stories, it revealed the universal struggle between impulse and aspiration. This character-driven moment speaks to psychological tension within all humans. In the quiet chambers of ancient wisdom, the rabbis gave us perhaps the most honest portrayal of the human condition. We are not born purely good or purely corrupted, but as walking paradoxes, creatures possessed simultaneously by noble aspirations and seductive impulses. The Hebrew term Yetzer Hara, literally meaning evil inclination, does not refer to some external demonic force plotting against our better nature. Rather, it describes something far more intimate and challenging, the internal tendency to choose what feels good in the moment over what serves our deepest values. Imagine standing at the crossroads of every decision, where your higher self whispers of meaning and purpose, while your immediate self calls out for comfort and gratification. This is the eternal dialogue that defines the human experience. The genius of rabbinic psychology lies not in denying this internal conflict, but in teaching us to recognize it as the very arena where our character is forged. In the Babylonian Talmud, the sages offer a striking metaphor. The evil inclination is like a father who bathes his son, anoints him with precious oils, dresses him in royal garments, places gold around his neck, and then abandons him at the doorway of a brothel. What can the boy do but sin? This vivid imagery captures something profound about our condition. We are born into a world where our most basic needs for nourishment, connection, and meaning can easily become distorted into their shadow forms. The need to eat becomes gluttony. The drive for companionship becomes compulsiveness. The search for purpose becomes hollow achievement. But here's where Jewish wisdom diverges from fatalistic worldviews. Each person is said to possess not just Yetzer Hara, but Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination. The battleground of virtue exists within us all. Modern neuroscience has unveiled the biological underpinnings of this ancient insight. Researchers studying self-control have discovered what the rabbis knew millennia ago. The brain's reward systems are constantly at odds with our higher cognitive functions. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for impulse control, literally battles the limbic system's demands for immediate gratification. But here's where contemporary research aligns beautifully with rabbinic teaching. The strength of our good inclination isn't fixed. Like a muscle, it grows stronger through conscious practice. Dr. Roy Baumeister's groundbreaking work on ego depletion shows that our capacity for self-control can be strengthened through deliberate training. This echoes the teaching of Rabbi Akiva: the greater the person, the greater their evil inclination. Why? Because as we expand our capacity for good, we simultaneously become aware of the vast landscape of temptation that exists beyond our current moral boundaries. In our contemporary world, this ancient wisdom offers a transformative approach to personal growth. Instead of fighting our impulses with brute force, Jewish philosophy teaches us the art of mindful recognition. When you feel the pull toward procrastination instead of meaningful work, when you sense the urge toward harsh judgment instead of compassion, when you notice the drift toward consumption instead of contribution, this is your Yetzer Hara making itself known. The goal isn't to eliminate these urges entirely, which would be both impossible and counterproductive. Rather, it's to develop what the sages called Yirat Shamayim, fear of heaven, or more accurately, reverent awareness of the sacred dimension of choice. Each moment of awareness creates a pause between stimulus and response. And in that sacred pause, your Yetzer Hatov, your capacity for excellence, has room to breathe. This is how virtue becomes not just a rule to follow, but a way of being to cultivate. And so we return to the ancient truth. Character is not inherited, but earned through the daily, hourly choice to align our actions with our highest aspirations, even when, and especially when, our impulses pull us in the opposite direction. In the Babylonian exile, Jewish thinkers confronted displacement that revealed the insight that identity endures through reinterpretation. This mirrors today's experiences of migration and cultural instability. Viewers can apply this by adapting traditions to new contexts. Let us turn our attention to those ancient days when Jerusalem lay in ruins and a people found themselves strangers in a strange land. The year was 586 BCE, and the Babylonian armies had razed the Holy Temple, carrying the cream of Judean society into exile. But within this devastation, something profound began to emerge, not merely survival, but a deeper understanding of what it means to remain authentically yourself when everything familiar has been stripped away. The exiles discovered that true identity is not bound to geography, but flows through the currents of reinterpretation and adaptation. Here, in the shadow of foreign empires, Jewish philosophers began to grapple with questions that would echo through millennia. If the temple was destroyed, where did God's presence dwell? If they could no longer offer sacrifices in Jerusalem, how could they maintain their covenant with the divine? The answers they forged would reshape not only Jewish thought, but provide a blueprint for anyone facing displacement. The Babylonian Talmud would later emerge from this period, a testament to their understanding that wisdom could flourish anywhere. They realized that adaptation did not mean abandonment. Rather, it meant carrying the essence of their tradition while allowing it to breathe in new contexts. This insight became their gift to future generations. The recognition that authentic identity is dynamic, not static, and that the deepest traditions grow stronger through thoughtful reinterpretation rather than rigid preservation. Today, as we witness unprecedented levels of global migration and cultural displacement, these ancient insights resonate with profound relevance. Consider the refugee who carries forward culinary traditions while adapting them to new ingredients. or the immigrant family who maintains their values while embracing new customs. Each faces the same fundamental question that confronted the Babylonian exiles. How do we remain authentically ourselves while becoming fully present in our new circumstances? The wisdom of exile teaches us that identity is not a fortress to be defended, but a river that flows and changes while maintaining its essential nature. In our contemporary world of cultural upheaval, we see this principle manifesting everywhere. In communities that blend traditions, in individuals who navigate multiple cultural identities, and in societies that must balance preservation with progress. The exile's lesson is that true strength lies not in resistance to change, but in the wisdom to discern what must remain constant and what may be transformed. This philosophy of adaptive identity offers us a practical framework for our own moments of transition and displacement. When you find yourself in unfamiliar circumstances, whether through physical relocation, career change, or cultural shifts, you need not abandon your core values. Instead, you can follow the exile's wisdom, identify what is essential to your identity, what connects you to your deepest wellspring, and what can be gently reinterpreted to serve your new context. Perhaps it's the principles you hold dear rather than the specific expressions of those principles. Perhaps it's the values you embody rather than the traditions you maintain. In every age, those who thrive are not those who resist all change, but those who, like the Babylonian sages, understand that wisdom often emerges through the creative tension between preservation and adaptation. As we rest in this understanding tonight, may we find comfort in knowing that identity, like wisdom itself, is not diminished by change, but refined by it, growing deeper and more resilient through each season of transformation. Jewish philosophers anticipated modern ethical pluralism centuries before it emerged, explaining why diverse societies struggle to find shared values. This prediction clarifies tensions in contemporary political life. Viewers can apply this by cultivating moral humility and dialogue. And so, we turn to the profound insight that medieval Jewish thinkers like Maimonides possess something remarkably prescient about the nature of ethical truth in pluralistic societies. In his Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides wrote not of a single rigid moral code, but of different levels of understanding that correspond to different intellectual and spiritual capacities. He understood that the same divine wisdom could be apprehended differently by different peoples, each approaching truth through their own cultural and intellectual frameworks. This wasn't moral relativism, rather, it was a sophisticated recognition that ethical revelation contains infinite depths. Each generation and each culture might access different facets of the same eternal wisdom. The Jewish philosophical tradition, from Philo's synthesis of Greek and Hebrew, thought in Alexandria, to the medieval rationalists who bridged Aristotelian philosophy with biblical wisdom, consistently maintained that moral truth, like light through a prism, reveals different colors to different observers while remaining fundamentally whole. This philosophical foundation explains why our contemporary moment feels so challenging, why societies that pride themselves on diversity and inclusion often find themselves fractured along ethical and cultural lines. Jewish philosophers understood that when diverse peoples attempt to coexist without acknowledging their different moral frameworks, they face what we might call the illusion of homogeneity. They saw that the human tendency to assume one's own ethical perspective represents universal truth, creates what Maimonides called the perplexity of the perplexed, a state where genuine seekers become confused precisely because they encounter genuine differences in moral understanding. The Hebrew concept of machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven, suggests that productive disagreement itself becomes a form of worship when conducted with mutual respect and recognition of shared divine purpose. Medieval Jewish communities, living as minorities within larger Islamic and Christian societies, developed sophisticated methods for navigating ethical differences without abandoning their core principles. Methods that spoke to the universal human challenge of maintaining identity while engaging authentically with others. In our current political landscape, where social media amplifies every disagreement and where communities fracture along increasingly fine ideological lines, these ancient insights offer practical wisdom. The Jewish philosophical tradition teaches us that moral humility, recognizing that our own ethical understanding, while genuine and valuable, represents only one facet of a larger truth, becomes not weakness but strength in pluralistic societies. This doesn't mean abandoning conviction or compromising on fundamental principles. Rather, it means approaching disagreement with what Jewish thinkers called hafkara, critical examination of our own position as seriously as we examine others. The practice of dialogue becomes itself a form of ethical development, teaching us to hold our beliefs firmly while remaining genuinely open to the possibility that others might illuminate aspects of truth we have not yet perceived. Like light that becomes more beautiful when it passes through a prism, ethical understanding itself becomes richer when it passes through the filter of genuine engagement with different perspectives. This ancient wisdom suggests that our contemporary struggles with moral disagreement might be not a bug in human nature, but rather an invitation to deepen our understanding of the divine wisdom that permeates all genuine moral seeking. Philosophers saw the modern crises of meaning long before existentialism arose, revealing how ancient struggles echo today's anxieties. This insight illuminates contemporary psychological stress. Viewers can apply this by embracing meaningful action in uncertain times. What we now recognize as existentialist thought, those profound questions about authenticity, meaning, and the weight of human choice, actually has deep roots in Jewish philosophical tradition that stretch back centuries before the term existentialism was even coined. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, often called the father of existentialism, wrestled with themes that Jewish thinkers had been exploring for generations: the anguish of indecision, the paradox of faith in an incomprehensible universe, and the individual's responsibility to choose goodness despite uncertainty. Consider how the ancient rabbis grappled with the problem of divine justice in a world filled with suffering, a question that echoes in modern psychological distress about purpose and meaning. The Talmudic debates about free will versus determinism directly prefigure the existentialist concern with human freedom and responsibility. When Maimonides wrote about the individual who must choose the ethical path without absolute certainty of divine reward, he was articulating what existentialists would later call authentic choice, decisions made not because they're easy or profitable, but because they align with one's deepest understanding of truth and goodness. This philosophical foundation reveals that what we experience today as modern anxiety about meaninglessness, choice paralysis, and the search for authenticity are not entirely new phenomena, but rather contemporary manifestations of perennial human concerns that Jewish philosophy has been thoughtfully addressing for over 2 millennia. Today's psychological landscape reflects these ancient insights with striking clarity. The rising rates of anxiety, depression, and existential crises in our hyper-connected yet somehow alienated world mirror the very concerns that Jewish philosophers identified as central to human flourishing. When contemporary therapy speaks about finding your authentic self or making values-based decisions, it echoes the medieval Jewish emphasis on kavana, intentional, conscious engagement with life's choices. The existentialist notion that existence precedes essence, that we define ourselves through our choices rather than arriving with predetermined nature, finds its philosophical antecedent in the Jewish concept of teshuvah, the possibility of authentic return and transformation. This suggests that the current mental health crisis might be understood not as a breakdown, but as a collective awakening to these profound questions about meaning and purpose that have always been at the heart of human experience. For practical application in our uncertain times, we might embrace what Jewish philosophy teaches about meaningful action. Act with intention even when uncertain, choose ethical engagement despite ambiguity, and trust that purposeful activity creates its own meaning. Rather than waiting for certainty before acting, we can follow the wisdom of our philosophical ancestors who understood that courageously engaging with life's uncertainties, guided by ethical principles and the pursuit of justice, creates a form of meaning that sustains us through any storm. In our age of information overload and endless choices, this ancient wisdom offers a pathway to authentic living, choosing to act meaningfully in the present moment, trusting that our efforts to repair what we can and improve what we touch contribute to something greater than ourselves. This is not passive acceptance, but active engagement with the world as it is, while working tirelessly for the world as it should be. Let this wisdom settle in your heart as you rest, knowing that you carry within yourself the capacity for meaningful action in whatever uncertain times await. Jewish thinkers saw the rise of scientific worldviews coming, and their insights explain why spirituality still persists today. This reveals that rationality and mysticism answer different human needs. Viewers can apply this by integrating scientific curiosity with inner exploration. Long before the European Renaissance, while scholars in other traditions struggled to reconcile faith with emerging scientific inquiry, Jewish philosophers were quietly preparing the intellectual groundwork for our modern understanding of knowledge itself. Consider Moses Maimonides, who in 12th century Cairo served as both royal physician to Saladin and author of the Mishneh Torah. He read Aristotle through Arabic translations, engaged deeply with Islamic astronomy and medicine, yet never saw contradiction between rigorous rational analysis and prophetic wisdom. Where others saw conflict, Maimonides perceived complementary modes of understanding. The Jewish intellectual tradition developed what we might call a cognitive architecture that accommodated multiple ways of knowing. Just as our modern universities separate departments but students move between them, medieval Jewish scholars distinguished between philosophical reasoning, philosophia, legal interpretation, halakha, and mystical contemplation, kabbalah, without viewing them as enemies. This wasn't intellectual confusion, but sophisticated epistemology. They understood that different human needs require different cognitive tools. When we seek to understand how the physical world operates, we need empirical observation and logical deduction. When we grapple with questions of meaning, purpose, and moral obligation, we need symbolic reasoning and contemplative insight. When we face existential anxiety about death, finitude, or divine presence, we need practices that connect us to transcendent reality. Each mode serves distinct psychological and spiritual functions. This philosophical architecture explains why spirituality has persisted even in our most scientifically advanced societies. The Jewish mystics who developed Kabbalah in medieval Spain understood something profound about human consciousness that contemporary neuroscience is only beginning to appreciate. Rational and mystical experiences involve different neural networks and serve different aspects of human flourishing. The mystical tradition speaks of 10 sephirot, not mathematical quantities, but qualitative dimensions of divine light, representing different modes of relating to ultimate reality. Similarly, contemporary psychology recognizes multiple intelligences and diverse ways of processing experience. A scientist can calculate planetary motion with mathematical precision while simultaneously experiencing transcendent wonder viewing the night sky. These aren't contradictions, but complementary expressions of human cognitive richness. The persistence of meditation practices, contemplative prayer, and spiritual seeking in modern scientific communities reveals this deeper truth about human nature. For contemporary seekers, this offers a practical framework for integrating scientific curiosity with inner exploration. Instead of viewing empirical investigation and spiritual practice as competing worldviews, we can approach them as different languages describing complementary dimensions of reality. A researcher studying quantum physics can simultaneously engage with Hasidic teachings about divine infinity. A medical professional can apply scientific methodology to clinical care while cultivating the mystical practice of hitbonut, meditative prayer, for personal grounding. The ancient Jewish wisdom traditions offer sophisticated tools for maintaining intellectual humility alongside spiritual depth. They teach us to ask different types of questions at different moments. How does this work? In the laboratory. What does this mean? In philosophical reflection. And how should I live? In ethical contemplation. This integrative approach doesn't diminish scientific rigor or spiritual authenticity, but enhances both by honoring the full spectrum of human knowing. As we navigate our complex modern world, perhaps the deepest wisdom lies not in choosing between reason and mysticism, but in developing the discriminating wisdom to know when each serves our highest calling. What if ancient wisdom still offers the best guidance for modern challenges? As we stand at the threshold of concluding our philosophical journey together, this question becomes especially poignant. Jewish philosophy suggests that ethical clarity emerges from combining reason, tradition, and introspection. 3 ways of knowing that, when woven together, create a tapestry of understanding both ancient and perpetually new. Today's fragmented world makes this synthesis even more necessary, perhaps more urgent than ever before. In our age of information overload, social polarization, and the constant noise of competing voices, we find ourselves yearning for the kind of integrated wisdom that our philosophical ancestors cultivated through centuries of careful thought, prayerful reflection, and community discourse. Tonight, as we explore this final synthesis, let us consider how the wisdom traditions of Jewish philosophy might illuminate the path forward for those of us navigating the complexities of contemporary life. Consider how the ancient philosopher Philo of Alexandria, writing in the 1st century, grappled with the challenge of harmonizing different ways of knowing, Greek philosophical reason with biblical revelation. His approach offers remarkable parallels to our own struggles with integrating diverse sources of knowledge in our information-saturated age. Philo didn't see reason and revelation as competing forces, but as complementary aspects of a unified truth-seeking process. Similarly, the wisdom tradition of Ben Sira, found in the Book of Sirach, emphasized that fear of the Lord, understood not as terror but as reverent awe, forms the foundation of practical ethics. This reverence-oriented approach provides a counterbalance to the purely analytical or purely emotional responses that often characterize modern discourse. Today's fragmented world, with its echo chambers, algorithmic information feeds, and tribal thinking, desperately needs this kind of synthesis. When we approach difficult questions with only pure logic, we risk becoming coldly calculating. When we rely solely on emotion, we may find ourselves swept away by temporary passions. But when we integrate reason, tradition's accumulated wisdom, and introspective reflection, we cultivate what Jewish philosophy calls da'at, a deep, embodied knowing that transcends mere information or fleeting feeling. The threefold path that Jewish philosophy offers, reason, tradition, and introspection, functions like a three-legged stool, each element supporting and stabilizing the others. Reason provides the analytical framework, helping us examine our assumptions and think clearly about complex issues. This isn't the narrow, mechanical logic that reduces everything to mathematical formulas, but a broader, more humane reason that includes logical thought, but also encompasses what philosophers call practical wisdom, the ability to discern what is truly important. Tradition offers the accumulated wisdom of generations, the hard-won insights of those who have walked similar paths before us. This isn't blind adherence to customs, but a respectful engagement with the wisdom embedded in our cultural and philosophical heritage. And introspection provides the inner dimension, the space for quiet reflection, for listening to the deeper currents of our own experience and conscience. In our age of constant distraction and external stimulation, this third element has become perhaps the most neglected. We have become experts at processing information but novices at cultivating inner stillness. Yet it is precisely in that quiet space that we can hear what Jewish philosophers call the still, small voice of wisdom, the inner voice that connects us to something larger than our immediate preferences or fears. Viewers can apply this wisdom by creating personal rituals of reflection, small but meaningful practices that cultivate the integration of reason, tradition, and introspection in daily life. Perhaps this begins with establishing what Jewish philosophers call a chavruta, a learning partnership where you engage in thoughtful dialogue with another person, approaching difficult questions together rather than in isolation. Or it might involve adopting the Jewish philosophical practice of havruta study, where you examine texts not to extract predetermined answers, but to discover new possibilities through patient inquiry. The key is creating intentional spaces, perhaps just 10 or 15 minutes each day, where you deliberately slow down, disconnect from the constant stream of external inputs, and turn your attention inward. This might involve reading a philosophical text slowly, practicing mindful breathing, or simply sitting in quiet contemplation. The specific form matters less than the quality of attention you bring to the practice. As we conclude our philosophical journey together, let us carry forward this understanding that the wisdom traditions of Jewish philosophy offer not just intellectual insights, but practical guidance for living with greater clarity, compassion, and meaning. In combining reason, tradition, and introspection, we discover a way of being in the world that honors both our rational capacities and our spiritual depths, a way of navigating modern challenges with the accumulated wisdom of ages while remaining fully present to the unique demands of our time. And in this synthesis, we find not rigid dogma, but living wisdom that grows and evolves as we do, accompanying us through all of life's seasons with quiet strength and enduring hope. In the quiet of contemplation, Jewish philosophy reveals its deepest teaching that wisdom is a lifelong journey. Here, at the gentle close of our exploration, we arrive not at an ending, but at a beginning that has no end. For throughout the millennia of Jewish thought, from the ancient sages who compiled the Mishnah to the mystics who glimpsed the infinite through the Zohar, one truth emerges with crystalline clarity. The pursuit of understanding is itself the destination. The Pirkei Avot, that timeless collection of ethical wisdom, opens with a remarkable chain of transmission, tracing the Torah from Moses at Sinai through generations of seekers. Yet this chain was never meant to conclude. It extends through time, reaching forward into this very moment, into you, into the quiet space where you now rest. The sages understood something profound, that wisdom is not a possession to be acquired and stored away, but a living stream that flows through those who remain open to its current. Consider the beautiful paradox embedded within Jewish learning. Ben Bagbag, a sage from the Mishnaic period, offered this instruction about the Torah: turn it and turn it, for everything is in it. This simple teaching carries infinite depth. The sacred text does not change, yet each return to its pages reveals new dimensions, new meanings that could not have been perceived before. You bring different eyes each time you look, different questions each time you ask. And so the text becomes a mirror, reflecting the growth of your own soul. This is perhaps the most radical insight Jewish philosophy offers to our restless modern world, that returning to the same source again and again is not repetition, but revelation. In our contemporary culture of instant gratification, where answers are expected at the speed of a search query, where patience has become almost countercultural, this ancient wisdom speaks with renewed urgency. We scroll through information endlessly, yet rarely pause to let any single insight penetrate deeply into our understanding. The rabbis of the Talmud engaged in a practice called machloket l'shem shamayim, disagreement for the sake of heaven. They understood that truth emerges not from singular proclamations, but from the dance of differing perspectives, from questions that generate more questions, from the humble acknowledgement that no single mind can contain the fullness of wisdom. Rabbi Tarfon's famous teaching echoes through the centuries: it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. What liberation exists in these words? You are not required to solve every mystery, to answer every question, to reach some final state of complete understanding. Such completion, the sages knew, belongs only to the infinite. Yet you are called to participate, to engage, to take up the work of seeking with sincerity and devotion. This is the middle path between arrogance and despair, the recognition that your contribution matters immensely, even as it remains forever partial, forever a fragment of a larger whole. And so we can gently turn our attention to what this means for your own life, in the days and nights that stretch before you. Jewish philosophy invites you to embrace what we might call patient curiosity, a willingness to sit with questions that have no immediate answers, to find comfort in the unknown rather than anxiety. In practical terms, this might mean pausing before the reflexive search for quick solutions, allowing yourself to wonder, to not know, to let uncertainty become a doorway rather than a wall. The Hasidic masters spoke of Deveket, cleaving to the divine, not as a destination reached once and for all, but as an ongoing orientation of the heart. Every moment offers this possibility anew. Every breath can become a return. The journey toward understanding does not require special conditions or perfect circumstances. It asks only for your presence, your willingness, your gentle attention to the mystery that surrounds and pervades all existence. As we conclude this extended meditation through the landscape of Jewish philosophy, let this final thought rest gently upon your awareness. The search for wisdom, unity, and ethical meaning through reason, revelation, and mystical insight is not a problem to be solved, but a journey to be lived. You have traveled tonight through ancient debates and mystical visions, through ethical frameworks and cosmic architectures of meaning. Yet all of these were never meant to be mere information. They were invitations, extended across centuries, asking you to join the great conversation, to add your voice, your questions, your wonder to the ongoing story. And now, as sleep approaches like a gentle tide, know that the seeking continues even in rest. Dreams too can be doorways. Silence too speaks. May the wisdom of the ages accompany you into peaceful slumber, and may you wake to find the journey waiting, patient as it has always been, eternal as the questions it holds, beautiful as the mystery it celebrates. Rest now, dear seeker. The path remains, and it is good.